Anyway, I'm going to talk about what science can say about God and the afterlife. And some of the material is material I'm also preparing for a debate next weekend in Corvallis at Oregon State University with William Lane Craig. That was the famous Christian apologist and theologian, philosopher. And so some of the stuff will actually be in reaction also to some of the things he says. And I actually debated him back in 2003 in Hawaii before about 1,000 people, so this will be my second shot at him. Anyway, you often hear it said that science is unable to prove or disprove the existence of God. Now, my argument is that science has now reached the point where we can say with confidence that a God with the attributes of the Judeo-Christian Islamic God does not exist, beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, surely all believers have to agree that there's no scientific evidence for God. If there were, it would be in the textbooks along with the evidence for neutrinos and DNA, quarks, and so on. And I claim that this absence of evidence can be taken as evidence for absence because it's evidence that should be there. You often hear it said that absence of evidence is not evidence for absence. Well, I claim it is if the evidence should be there. For example, I'd like to give is that suppose someone proposed that there were elephants in Rocky Mountain National Park near where I live. I mean, that would be a hypothesis, and you could test it by looking for them and so on. You never find them. Well, I think that you could reasonably assume that if you didn't find elephants in Rocky Mountain National Park after a while, you can assume beyond a reasonable doubt that they don't exist, because they would certainly have left some kind of sign. And that's what I'm talking about with respect to God now. At this level, this day and age, we should have seen the evidence by now of a God that plays such an important role. Now, science deals with observations, and the God of Abraham, Jesus, and Muhammad plays such an important role in the universe, an active role, that his actions should surely have been observed by now. He's supposed to be responsible for everything that happens in the universe, for every atomic transition in the farthest galaxy to every leaf falling to the ground here on Earth. He listens to every human thought and acts on those thoughts, at least supposedly. Now let me list some of the places where the actions of God should have been observed with sufficient likelihood to make the fact that they have not been observed positive evidence that God does not exist. God is supposed to talk to people. This is something that could be easily tested. Just have the person who says she talked to God provide some information that she could not possibly have known, but is later objectively verified. Now, the sacred books are supposed to be the Word of God, but they tell us that the earth is flat, not round, that disease is caused by sin, not germs, that knowledge comes from eating fruit from a magic tree, not science. In short, it gives us the best thinking of ancient illiterates. But we don't have to look back to books thousands of years old for evidence of revelation. If God talked to people then, he must talk to them now. And while many people continue to claim such revelations, not one has been verified in the way that I said, with some evidence that could be tested. Indeed, many such claims, such as Pat Robertson's yearly predictions, have turned out to be false. In short, the absence of evidence for revelation is evidence for the absence of God. Number two, the second area where God's actions can easily be verified is with prayer. While we can't expect God to answer every prayer, with billions being submitted every year for thousands of years now, you would think by now a few should have been have led to some action by God that was confirmed scientifically. In fact, reputable institutions such as Harvard, Duke, Mayo Clinic have carried out very careful experiments that asked whether intercessory prayer had any significant effects on health, and they have found no evidence that it does. In short, the absence of evidence for the efficacy of prayer is evidence for the absence of God. Now, I want you to note that these two examples of God's actions could have turned out otherwise and provided real evidence for God, if he existed. Admittedly, in the past, when our knowledge was deficient, it was tempting to rely on God as a stopgap, the God of the gaps, to explain all that was inexplicable. But even in the days of Newton, scientists and philosophers have been postulating a reality without the existence of God simply because it was not necessary to make such a postulate. It's amazing to me that for all these years, without a shred of evidence for the existence of God, people still listen to the arguments for God. Now, the third area where God's absence is evident is in the lack of design in nature. No one could imagine how the enormous complexity of life could have been explained naturally, and therefore it had to be God who did it, until Darwin and Wallace showed how complexity follows from evolution by natural selection. Since then, in every field of science, from elementary particle physics to cosmology to chemistry, biology, neuroscience, social sciences even, we've demonstrated that there is a natural tendency in nature to go from complexity to simplicity. For example, just look at the example of water. You start out with water vapor, and if you have no heat, that water vapor will spontaneously change into liquid water, and then that will again change into ice, which has more structure. Just think of a snowflake, for example, how you get more order. So there is a real tendency in nature, and computer simulations also bear this out, that order can form out of chaos. So biological life does not look at all like it should look if it is the result of intelligent design. It's filled with useless appendages, such as junk DNA. In fact, life looks just as it should look if it is a result of the unguided, cobbled together processes of evolution. In short, the absence of evidence for design in nature is evidence for the absence of God. The fourth topic is cosmology. Theology teaches that God made the universe from nothing. And again, no one could imagine how in the past, and again, many of these arguments were good arguments at one time for God. They just said no longer good arguments for God. No one could imagine how the matter of the universe could have come from nothing without violating the laws of physics, requiring a miracle, in other words. And Einstein showed that matter can be created out of energy. Still, no one could imagine where the energy came from, until just recent decades, when satellite experiments have shown that the total energy of the universe is actually zero, and so it didn't have to come from any place. No one could imagine where the order of the universe could have come from, except from a higher order, until it was discovered that the universe was expanding, and so there's always more room for order to form. As the universe expands, there's more room. So no laws of physics are violated by a natural creation out of nothing, a non-supernatural